She's known far and wide for her larger-than-life TV personality. She's outspoken and unapologetic in her pursuit of justice for victims.
FYI, for your information, because this is not some kind of dog and pony trick at the circus. These are real people that have really suffered. Suffered horribly. And after time passes, they feel that nobody cares, but people do care. You care. I care.
Today on The Balanced Voice, Rania welcomes the legendary Nancy Grace for a raw discussion about rising crime, serving victims, and Nancy's journey to where she is today. In the second half of the interview, Crime Stoppers Director of Victim Services and Nancy's longtime friend, Andy Kahn, bombs Rania and Nancy's interview, and honestly, at that point, we aren't sure who's the third wheel in the conversation. Let's jump into this eventful discussion. Here's your host, Rania Mancarios.
Welcome to the Balanced Voice podcast. We're always so excited by the guests we have. And today we have a legend, Miss Nancy Grace. Nancy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a real honor.
So I've obviously been watching you for a long time. American legal commentator, television journalist, author, podcast host. You've really touched on some of the biggest criminal cases that have impacted us all. You're an avid crime fighter and a voice for victims. And I have to just start by asking you, we are facing, a crime pandemic, and a colleague of ours has called it a crime pandemic and a bond pandemic in this country. We're seeing crime skyrocket in major cities from coast to coast, Harris County particularly being impacted by this. I'm curious, from where you sit and you see these rising crime numbers, and you also see this change in how we're talking about criminal justice, where oftentimes the defendant now is becoming the victim or the primary person that we want to coddle through the system. Nancy, what is your take on what's happening?
I hate to see what is happening now in our justice system. The literally revolving door of justice, where defendants, even violent defendants, charged in shootings, in rapes, in homicides, are bonded out, sometimes at no bond at all. They just walk free. And there are many, many statistics that show, for instance, when a child molester is finally apprehended, how many dozens of times they have molested before. When we have a killer, you think that's his first time at the rodeo? Because it's not. Which tells me, and I was just talking about this to my children on the way to school this morning, about a story I would tell jurors when I would have a defendant that had similar transactions, as they're called in the law, when they have a history of the same type of crime. And it's a story of Mr. Frog and Mr. Scorpion. Mr. Frog was at the river, and Scorpion said, "Please give me a ride across because I can't swim." And Froggy said, "No, you'll bite me and I'll die." And Scorpion says, "No, that doesn't even make sense. If you die, we both die. We'll go down together." Froggy thought about it and gave him a ride. Just as they got to the center and deepest part of the river, Froggy felt a pain go from his neck to his toes. And he said, "Mr. Scorpion, why did you bite me? For now, we'll both surely die." And Scorpion said, "I can't help it. It's my nature." So you want to tell me a killer isn't going to get out and re-offend in some way, or a doper's not going to sell dope, or a burglar's not going to burgle, or a child molester's not going to molest again because he got his fingerprint taken? No. And that is what our courts are doing. They are letting known violent felons straight back out to prey on people like you and me. And when you gave your list of who you think I am a crime victim. My fiancé was murdered just before our wedding. My dream of becoming a Shakespearean literature professor went right down the tubes. And my life with Keith never happened. Now I'm a mother, and I will go to hell and back to protect my children. And the courts are not helping me.
And that's what's so interesting, obviously, knowing about you and following you for so long. We, of course, know that your fiancé, Keith, was murdered, 19 years old. It changed your entire course of life's work. And I think that's the foundation for the passion you have and why you have such a heart for victims. What do we do, though, when you're talking about something that makes sense on paper? You have a murderer who has a lengthy criminal history, a rapist who has a lengthy criminal history. And yet there's this revolving door of justice that says, yes, but you know what? Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. Therefore, we can never hold anyone until they're actually proven guilty. And we're sitting here arguing for the victims. Well, what does that mean? I'll tell you, I was recently talking to a colleague of mine about some of the policy changes that are happening in Harris County. And our current county is taking a holistic approach to crime. And we're not criticizing any
that.
Well, so let me hold. Okay, so here we go, Nancy. So the part of the theory is, we need to cut the grass and plant trees and make sure buildings are not desolate. And to, you know what, we agree. You can't have overgrown fields, and you can't have parts of town where there are abandoned buildings and there's no good lighting. And this woman I was talking to said, in my neighborhood, a guy will drag a little girl into an overgrown field and rape her and kill her. We have to be cutting the grass. We have to have
excuse me. What does cutting the grass have to do with letting that killer rapist out? I don't understand that disconnect.
That's my point. And
I'm all for cutting the grass. I've done it many times myself. Fine, great, have at it. But what does that have to do with letting that POS, technical legal term, out of jail?
And that's
when you said the presumption of innocence. Yes, we have that when you go to trial. We're not idiots. Yes, you get the presumption of innocence at trial, but you should be held behind bars until you go to trial.
And that's my point. And what I said to this woman when we were talking, I said, I agree. Again, you want to cut the grass, you want to do all of that. But why would I release this man to then go grab the little sister and rape and kill her as well? I mean, the arguments are not making sense. And the discussion that anyone who is now public safety minded is really heartless. We don't have hearts for disenfranchised communities. We're not thinking of, minorities such as myself. It's an unfair argument, and it's actually insulting, because that's not the point. A lot of the victims we deal with are from disenfranchised communities. They're minorities like myself, and we're trying to advocate for them. It seems, Nancy, that the conversation has completely flipped. It's completely flipped. And
it's flipped because our so-called leaders have let it flip. Yes, we are empathetic and sympathetic to crime victims. I prosecuted in inner city Atlanta for the bulk of my legal career, where I represented almost exclusively women, children, and minorities, specifically African Americans. My jurors were nearly all African American, because that is who lives in the city, the inner city Atlanta. And to suggest that I or anybody else on our staff didn't care about those victims, that's why we were there. That's why we were going to trial, instead of giving a cheap plea and letting some creep, some felon, walk straight out of jail. We were there to protect them. So that's a crock of BS right there.
I was watching, obviously, recent news of a comment Jen Psaki made, laughing off American crime concerns. What she said really stuck with me, because we are dealing with cities that are literally in chaos. I'll tell you, Harris County, we're having, road rage, random shootings, people are getting killed, home invasions. It's hard to run in the park or go to the mall. It's an actual problem. And I love what you said in response to Jen. You said, I'm so proud to be part of searching for these fugitives, because our federal government is not doing it for us. And when I hear Jen Psaki laugh about what is soft on crime, I will tell you what is soft on crime. It is a low bond or no bond. It is defunding the police. It is not supporting our U.S. Marshals that are out there risking their lives to find fugitives. That is what soft on crime is. I know she's tried to step back from her statement. What does that tell you, though, about the current, government or the current feeling on criminal justice across this country or crime across the country?
I typically do not politicize crime because crime affects everyone, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you're white or black, whether you're a Methodist or a Quaker or a Muslim or Jewish. It affects everybody. I think that it's convenient for the White House to look away from violent crime because it doesn't fit into their agenda. That's not what they're pushing. But what they're selling, I'm not buying. And I don't care if they're a Democrat or Republican or green or an independent. I don't care. But what they're saying is a lie. And the worst part of this is that there will be no change until enough innocent victims have been raped or murdered or molested. And finally, that will bring about change. And it's so easy. It's so darn easy. And it feels better to sit back and not think about that crime victim, that mother who dies on the sidewalk, and her last thought, or of her children, they're going to be raised without her. And then it's over because a felon was out and killed her. It's better, easier to go through life with blinders, I guess, according to the White House, and not grapple with the harsh reality. I grappled with it. How was I supposed to know that walking out of a statistics exam at Mercer University one afternoon, I stepped out, and I remember thinking that day, I had been in this dark room taking the test, and I came out and I went, wow, it's so bright and beautiful today. I remember that moment, and I set off by foot across campus to my job, which was at the library at university, and I stopped to make a phone call, and I was told to call my fiancé's sister. And I knew right then, I don't know how I knew, but I knew Keith was murdered. Now, how is that someone that has no knowledge of crime or the criminal justice system suddenly coming out of a statistics exam is a tangential victim of murder? I didn't know anything about the court system. My first time I ever set foot in the courtroom was when I was a witness at that trial. That's the only way we're going to get change, and that's wrong because it's not convenient for them to grapple with the truth.
I think of you that day, and I think of all the victims that we talk to, unfortunately on a daily basis, and it encourages us to keep doing the work we're doing because you're right. This will not self-correct. This is going to have to change because enough people in the community have stepped up to say enough is enough. Nancy, I want to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to talk to you about some of the most poignant cases you've covered in your career. We'll be right back in a moment. So we are back with Nancy and our Director of Victim Services, Andy Kahn. You two go way back.
Yes, we do. We go way back. When I first met Nancy, we had her as a keynote for Victims' Rights Week. And I met her and I brought her back to my office and I said, hey, I want to show you some things I got in this duffel bag. And I started pulling out all this murderabilia items. And
I feel like it was yesterday.
Did you? And
Well, tell her what you pulled out.
I remember what
Raphael Resendez's toenails.
Yeah. I pulled out his autograph. I pulled out somebody's fingernails. I pulled out somebody's hair, and it got your attention.
Boy, did it.
Yeah, I'll say it did.
It really inspired me. I even included a chapter in my first book, objection, and the chapter was murderabilia or blood money. No, it was blood money,
Right.
and it talked about you and what I learned that day. And you know what, Andy? I had a computer. It was about a laptop. It was about $200. Okay, it was little bitty thin at that time, super cheap, and I used it to research the book. I used that laptop constantly. And after writing the blood money chapter about murderabilia, how people would try to get a hold of, for instance, Nicole Brown's autopsy photos and her autopsy report and pictures of dead bodies and all the ghouls in the world. Do you know, I couldn't stand to touch the laptop anymore when I finished that book, and I destroyed the laptop. I got rid of it.
Oh.
I just thought it had so much bad karma to it. And hey, what if somebody had ever searched that and they went, oh my goodness, Nancy Grace is
what are you looking at?
dead body pictures. Like I just can't even have this around me anymore. It was so awful what people will do. And I learned all that from you, Andy.
That's how I feel about the duffel bag. I'm like, wait, I don't even want to walk into his office. I'm like, where's the bag? I don't want to be near the bag.
You see him approaching with a gym bag, run. But you two have worked on some cases together. One of them being, the Belinda Temple case.
I introduced you to Belinda's parents when you were down here, Tom and Carol, and your first show that kicked off your show on a Sunday night, and you flew Tom and Carol up on your show. And that was your debut show, was talking about this case that is still going on.
15
years plus later, we're still waiting.
And you know what, Andy? Here's something you didn't know about that. As if there's anything I could tell you about fighting crime. It was presented to me that we should do as our first show a person that had been convicted of murder that claims they're innocent. I'm like, no, we're going to do Belinda Temple. That's what we're going to do. That's what Nancy Grace is going to do on her debut show. And once they heard the facts, I mean, everybody agreed. But that had to be told. And can you believe this many years later, we still don't have the answer?
No, I've been with this family since January 11th, 1999. 1999, I have been with Belinda's family. I've never seen a case like this in my...
You know what? We need to revisit that on the Fox Nation Sirius XM program.
Yeah.
And I don't call it a show, FYI, for your information, because this is not some kind of dog and pony trick at the circus. These are real people that have really suffered. I mean, suffered horribly. And after time passes, they feel that nobody cares, but people do care. You care. I care.
People do care. And the way our organization works is we never stop. As long as there's an investigation to be had, the case is unsolved, we literally never stop. We will continue working and putting information up, because the power of you sharing stories like that, it can't be weighed. I mean, people call in, they'll share. I mean, Andy, don't you feel like it doesn't matter how many years go by?
No, not at all. For the families that I deal with, surviving family members of homicide, whether it's 10 years, 30 years, or 1 week, every day is the same, because there's not a day that goes by where you don't think of your loved one. And we host meetings every month here at Crime Stoppers, Parents of Murdered Children and Surviving Family Members of Homicide. And I'll tell you, Nancy, I want to say within the last year, I have watched attendance double. And I've been with this group for 29 years.
Hey, Andy, what was the case that we just did about? It was Summer Chester, 23-year-old Summer Chester was killed by a guy that was already behind bars for a home invasion and shot the husband asleep in the bed with the wife. Home invasion, so he could get her purse and a little bit of money and a cell phone, I think. Shoots him dead, gets out. Isn't this in your jurisdiction? And they killed Summer Chester. And what's the name of the judge?
That was Natalia Korn, the 351st. So the guy, Jonathan Gurg,
something like that. Natalia Cornelius.
Nada, Judge Nada's. Like
her. She did that.
No, she lowered
did
his,
that, and
she
she's not
lowered
the
his
only
bond.
one.
Yes. He's actually on a capital murder charge. He gets another felony while he's in custody. He racks up.
Right.
90
Hey, isn't he the one that spit on the
Yes.
jailer?
Correct.
99 pages
99
of behind bars
pages worth of-
infractions.
right. And yet you saw fit to lower the bond from 250 to 50. That decision.
Put up $5,000. And you know what? Summer Chester, so precious. Inside and out. And you know, Andy, we've known me since before, I got married and had children. And Lucy and I almost died in childbirth because that murder of my fiancé messed me up so much. I dropped out of school. I lost down to 89 pounds. I couldn't even stand to hear a clock tick in the house. My mother had to stop all the clocks. And it was well over 20 years after that I felt I could walk down the aisle. And can I tell you something else? The morning, got married at high noon. That day, I almost did not think I could do it. Because what if David got killed or just something like that? But my father was there.
It's always with you.
Walked down the aisle, and I did it. And it's been the best thing that ever happened to me. But because I waited so long, Andy, at my age, giving birth to twins, Lucy, my little girl, almost died because of that emotional problem I had about ever getting married again. I thought, what am I, a jinx? Am I going to hurt David? Like what happened to Keith? I know it's not rational, but I could not bring myself to get married and start a family when that's all I wanted. It screws you up forever.
And you think, like, hearing you, somebody so accomplished, so successful, so admired, to hear you so vulnerably talking about the impact of trauma with all the resources you have. I mean, it makes me think of all the other people walking around our community right now that are dealing with similar layers of trauma that don't have the ability to deal with it. It's overwhelming. And it's why we're so proud of the work we do to step in for victims, and so proud of the work you do to not stop fighting for victims.
You know what? I thought I knew it all after his murder. But now that I have children, I can relate to what Keith's parents went through and what parents all over go through. I represented so many victims and their families where the parents had seen the murder of their child. I don't know how they did it, Andy. I do not know how they did it. I really don't.
You and you're our good friend Mark Class that went through Polly.
Yes.
Yeah. And still to this day. And you'll relate to this. I hear all the time when I go up and testify on bills, and I hear how much it's going to cost to keep people locked up. And I come back and I say,
not as much as it's going to cost to let them out and kill somebody else.
What I never hear anybody talk about? And that's the cost of victimization. Have you ever heard anyone talk about the cost of being a crime victim? You never do. No one talks about it.
Can I tell you something? Sitting here right now, I was having a flashback to Keith's funeral. And when I stepped in, that overwhelming smell of floral chrysanthemums, when I smell that smell, even to this day, it makes me nauseous. Just people have no idea what it does. Hey, you do know he's totally stealing your show. Did you know that?
Oh, no, Nancy.
Up in there.
He steals everything, and I love it. But I have to ask you before we wrap up with you, because, as a mom of three, and we're all parents working in this field, you're now raising your twins. You have the impact of the trauma, but you also deal with the most difficult cases in this country. How do you balance that with raising kids in today's world and in today's culture?
I don't balance it. What do you mean balance?
Well,
Nothing I mean, any of us do is balance. We deal with devils straight out of hell that are walking this earth and victimizing innocent people. And I don't care why. I don't care if they had a bad childhood or they had a bad home life or they this or they that. I care about, no, I don't want that to happen to anyone, but I care about the innocent victim. Balance. Well, I don't even know what you're saying. My children don't wonder anymore. Why is mom jogging through the parking lot during recess? Wow,
Nancy, I've done that. Nancy, I've done that. I've done that. I've literally done that. Like, I can't believe that you've done that as well.
Yeah.
I have done that.
Except I don't try to hide it. I'm like, hey, you got in lockdown this morning? No, no, I don't care. And literally have written books on how to stay safe. And I employ every one of those rules. The other day, we were driving home from something. I think it was Scouts. They let out way too late at night. But I saw a teen girl walking along the sidewalk. I'm sorry, children, which they're 14. John David is 6'5", Andy. He's 6'5".
Saw him last
They both tower over me. I'm like, what is that? And they go, stranger danger. Explain. They're in the back seat. They go, if someone pulls up to you, run in the other direction. Run to somebody's backyard. Cross yards so the car can't fall. I mean, they start regurgitating everything they're supposed to do. But the reality is when you're scared, you can't think of those rules. And
Right.
So that means we have to keep the streets safe.
Nancy Grace, it is just such a privilege and an honor. And with our special guest, Andy Kahn, to have you guys on the Balanced Voice podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for inviting me. And Andy, I wasn't just throwing that out there. We need to revisit Belinda's case.
Yes.
Now.
Because it still sits. We have nothing scheduled.
What else do those judges have to do? What are they doing? Going out to a fancy lunch? They need to get in there and put the nose to the grindstone.
Yep. You'll get her. I mean, I cannot tell you how frustrating it is for Belinda's twin sister, Brenda, and her brother, Brian. And
I forgot that she was a twin.
Yeah. The saddest day in the trial in 2019 was when their son, Evan, came in and they kept Evan from Belinda's family. They hadn't seen him in 20 years.
No.
And I will never forget, I was sitting next to Brian, and that's the first time they saw Belinda's son since he was almost 4 years old.
Now let me thinks his dad is innocent. Does he?
I think he's totally brainwashed, frankly, and it's so sad. And it is truly sad watching him. The bottom line is he's a 2-time convicted murderer. 22 out of 24 jurors recommended life. You had 2 idiot rogue jurors the last time that were absolutely clueless. And that's why we are where we are. Have you ever seen a trial that's lasted this long with no resolution?
No. I'm trying to think of one off the top of my head.
No. And, Brian and I said, we hope this never happens to any family ever, because no one should go.
Pure hell. They've never even had a chance to heal.
No, nothing, period. So I'll, like I said, I'll never forget. That was your first show. That was amazing.
Please invite me back when you can.
Oh my gosh, Nancy, this is open for you anytime. You've been on our list of dream guests from day one. So we're so thrilled to have you. And we couldn't not have Andy with us today.
No way. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank
you.
Peace out.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Conversation. You can find real solutions and tangible resources in our show notes at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com. To join the conversation, follow us on Instagram at The Balanced Voice Podcast and on Twitter at @BalancedVoice_. Stay up to date on Runya's work by following her at The Runya Report, and we can't wait to see you next week for another Balanced Conversation.